Now, you know how the government works on this. You also know about the figures. When you first hear £6 billion going to the NHS, are you going, yay, or are you going, oh, it needs more than that?
Well, the health service can always use more money, but £6 billion is obviously a substantial amount of money. And I'm pleased that it's going into the development of the diagnostic hubs. I think that's a good idea, and I think it's a step in the right direction. So I think it's good news. But I think it's also worth reminding ourselves of two things. The first is that diagnostic hubs, new scanners and so forth, aren't any use if you haven't got staff who can use them. And the health service and the wider health and care system has a real staffing problem at the moment. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, the same day as it happens that the government's announcing 5.9 billion for capital expenditure in the health service, the Home Care Association is also pointing out that underfunding in local authority services is meaning that social care continues to be stressed. And if social care is stressed, that leads to avoidable pressures, and that's the key point, avoidable pressures on the National Health Service.
Good morning, Stephen. And just more immediately, let's say, this Plan B that's been unveiled by Sajid Javid. I mean, can you see that they will impose certain sort of mandatory, mask wearing, etc. again? Is this going to happen? Can you see it?
Well, I suppose, to be candid, my answer to that is you don't need to look into the crystal ball when you can read the book. Unfortunately, we've seen ever since the beginning of this pandemic a story of pressure building and the government reacting too slowly to rising infection rates and therefore rising pressures within the health service. And so I say again, I welcome the fact there's more money going into the health service this week. But again, more money won't help us if A&E departments are overburdened by, again, avoidable pressures related to COVID and actually other respiratory diseases. There's clear evidence of rising demand in emergency departments of hospitals at the moment from COVID, but from other respiratory diseases as well, because we obviously didn't have so much of that last year, and there's lower levels of immunity and evidence of rising demand already coming through, and the winter's barely upon us yet.
Stephen, what's going on behind the scenes? You know how this works. Is this health versus politics? Because there is a suspicion that Boris Johnson is delaying, that he's dithering because he doesn't want to start the COP26 conference with new restrictions in this country.
Well, there's that, and there's also the reality is ministers do have. There's no getting away from this, and it's not a criticism, particularly of the government. You do have, of course, you have to weigh different pressures, and there are the economic pressures. There's the pressures related to COP. There's also the pressures that people don't want to live with restrictions if those can be avoided. So Boris Johnson is clearly resistant to avoidable restrictions, and I understand that. But surely to goodness, we're nearly 2 years into this pandemic now, and the experience of our own experience and experience in other countries demonstrates that you get the best results by acting quickly when there's evidence of rising demand on emergency departments in hospitals. And that's what's starting to emerge, which is why I agree with the NHS Confederation and other voices that have said we now need to act quickly so that we're not making the same mistake as we've made more than once before during this pandemic.
Quick one on the story that's got a lot of our viewers talking this morning, and that's the no job if you're no jab. As a former health secretary, would you ever have envisaged a moment where you were threatening people that they would lose their jobs if they didn't have a vaccination of any sort?
Well, I have to say I find it quite difficult to understand why there is resistance in the health service. And if I can make the same point again, in the wider social care system. People look at the health service, and there's a tendency just to look at the NHS rather than the health and care system as a whole. If you're looking after vulnerable people, it does seem to me, actually, the health secretary is right to say you should have the jab. But before you go into legal, just saying to people that their services are no longer required, we should remind ourselves that one of the real constraints on delivering health and care services at the moment is the high vacancy rate and the difficulty recruiting staff. So there's, again, competing pressures there.
Yeah, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Well, you're certainly making life more difficult for yourself. I suppose the first question is, could you employ people who are very resistant to a jab in some non-patient facing service?
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.